So, hello everyone. My name is Unai Gastelumendi. I am a collaborator of Rankia, the leading Spanish-speaking financial community. And today I'm glad that we have with us the great Martin Armstrong. How are you, Martin?
Oh, very good.
Thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Right. I usually start these interviews with, before we go into the different questions that I have for you and different subjects, a bit for you to walk us through your background. Okay, so the question is, where did you get your extensive knowledge about capital flows, currencies, cycles, gold? How do you have such a wide experience in all that?
Basically, being a hedge fund manager. In the 80s, I mean, we were dealing, I would say we were probably one of the first analysts in foreign exchange. And that really is what opened up everything around the world, mainly because in Europe, the problem was the politicians had made all the currency movements politics, really. So, you know, like Germany, they'd say, oh, I did a good job. The German mark's up and give 2 cents against the dollar. So it made it very difficult for any analyst to ever say the Deutschmark would go down. You know, I mean, that would be like a traitor to his country. Where in the United States, currency was never a political issue. I mean, no president could win an election saying, gee, the dollar's up against the Mexican peso, so I did a good job. Everybody would laugh, So currency was more independent in the United States than it was in Europe back then. And so we just had so many institutions. I mean, around the world because of this. I mean, the floating exchange rate system only started in 1971, and they still don't even teach it in universities today. They still teach the old theories from the fixed exchange rate, Keynesian economics, etc. And that's why we're in so much trouble today, because there's no theories that actually comply with the current economy. And back in the 80s, we had an office in Geneva, and everybody was dealing with all the OPEC money back then. And then all of a sudden, Japan started coming up. And you saw the capital flows moving to Japan, and all the talent moved. The top brokers at Merrill Lynch, etc., that were in Geneva, all migrated to Tokyo. And so then you had the big boom in Japan up until 1989. And then after that, it was more or less, okay, fine, what's next? Oh, Southeast Asia, and everybody went there. So, I mean, capital flows from an international hedge fund perspective, I mean, it was just a piece of cake. I mean, you saw how the money moved, where it went. And they don't teach those things in school. However, I mean, you can go online and look at Herbert Hoover's memoirs from the Great Depression and read 1931. And he's describing how capital moved back then. He said it acted like a cannon on a deck of a ship in the middle of a hurricane. It was shooting off in every which direction so fast they couldn't figure out where it was going next. And that's exactly what has taken place in modern times. When Greece was in trouble in 2010, and the traders made a lot of money on that, they immediately turned around, oh, who's next? Oh, Portugal. Yeah, let's go over there. And then, then they go up to Italy and then France. I mean, this is the way, dealing rooms would work. The traders would move to wherever the money's at that point. Mm-hmm. So you could see the capital flows in a trading room. And these things were just never taught in universities because they just teaching old theories. I mean, I won't mention which one, but one of the top 10 in the world I went to lunch with. They asked me to come over. I said, yeah, okay, fine. We went to lunch, and they asked me if I would teach in a university. And I said, no, I'm not really interested in that. And I said, why are you asking me to teach? And they actually said to me, we know what we teach doesn't work. And so I asked them, I said, look, I would do a guest lecture or something, but I wouldn't stand there and teach a class to a bunch of kids, really. And they explained, he says, that's the problem. Nobody wants to come back. I said, so, I mean, the economy and things change. Um, and I mean, Keynes, they thought was completely out of his mind in the 1920s. And then the Great Depression comes and, oh, Keynes, yeah, look at that idea. And that's just the way it is. I mean, Einstein, they said, oh, he'll never amount to anything. Then all of a sudden, Einstein's a genius. It's, we end up with these old ideas, I think, and they don't change from academia at all. And it takes something from the outside to change it.
We end up with Keynesian, right? Keynes, his theory was for a set of conditions specific, and then afterwards, it's all those conditions. They are not specific anymore. They are made general, and everybody applies that. But Keynes, he never advocated for that. It's not Keynesians that have everything upside down.
If you just look at what he actually said, he said during a recession you could go to a deficit, not every year after year.
Exactly.
And he also said you can stimulate the economy by lowering taxes, which they don't do. They raise taxes. And they call this Keynesian economics. I think if he was still alive, he'd be rolling over in his grave. But, this is the problem. It's that in politics, they're only interested in their own survival, period. And they will never accept responsibility. I mean, you take the ECB, they lowered interest rates to negative in 2014. It has failed to stimulate the economy. They end up being trapped, and they want to blame everybody else but themselves. And they can't raise the interest rates now. So and this was based upon old theories. I mean, even the Federal Reserve chairman who became very, famous, Paul Volcker, in 1979, he wrote a book. It's called The Rediscovery of the Business Cycle. And you can go to our site and you'll see we quote right from his book there. And he says that was the new theory of economics, and it was proved to be wrong in the 1974 to 75 crash. So yet, here we are still using the same theories, and he wrote back in 79 it didn't work.
Yes, exactly. Let's move on to Socrates, Martin. So that other side of yours, that is, you are kind of a financial expert. You see the flows, how they go. You interpret the information of the capital flows. But then you have an IT side as well, because that tool of yours, that forecasting machine, I believe you coded yourself. Then the history says that somebody in Wall Street, Goldman, or I don't know who, was very interested on it. You refused to give it to them, and then that got you into trouble. Kind of, let us know what happened there.
Basically, it's the old adage that people judge others by themselves. And, the bankers were it started in 1998. And if you even look at the Federal Reserve chart on the velocity of money, it's been declining since that event.
Yeah.
The first event was when long-term capital management collapsed. And we gave us, our conference that year was in London. And I didn't realize it, but somebody from the London Financial Times had snuck in there. And then he put on the front page of the second section, he said, because our forecast was, the computer came up and we saw the capital flow problem, and we put out a forecast that's saying that Russia was going to collapse, and we give it about 60 days. And what we saw was 100 billion going in, yes, but 150 billion coming out. So at some point, that's got to give. And we gave it about 60 days. And the London FT basically reported that forecast and said, gee, if everybody listens to Armstrong, we're going to have a real, crisis on our hands here. And it happened. And so the bankers lost a tremendous amount of money in that because, they're always trying to rig the game. They had put on a dinner in Washington, D.C. For the IMF. And they invited me down there, always trying to get me to join them. They said, see, we got the IMF in our pocket. I said, I don't care who you have. I said, I advise the people the IMF have to go get the money from. And I said, it's not going to work. And they would never listen to me that way. And so they think that they could bribe their way into markets. Platinum market, they were paying bribes to a Russian minister to recall the platinum to take a inventory, and platinum, goes up $200, and then all of a sudden they all take short positions. The platinum comes back to the market, and Russia announces, oh, we found some more, by the way, and the price crashes. I mean, it's always been this rigged game that they play, and every time it blows up in their face, they end up going to government for a bailout. And it's been, well, if you don't bail us out, who's going to sell your bonds? So it's been a blackmail game. Mm-hmm. So the banks end up getting bailed out for their losses, and nobody ever goes to jail. So instead of saying that maybe what they're doing is wrong, they would blame me and say, oh, I have more influence than they do because we have so many more clients around the world. So that they would say, oh, I'm the one that caused it because I told everybody that they were going to lose and they lost. And it's always been that battle between the two of us for, going on for quite some time. But, I think that's coming to an end because the governments can't bail out the banks anymore. It's politically incorrect. And so you're seeing a lot of other things starting to change. And over the next few years, they're looking at banks don't need branches anymore. They're trying to make everything digital. And that's really part of this Agenda 2030 to eliminate debts. And you have to understand that I have advised probably more governments than anybody ever. Even when the Asian currency crisis happened in 1997, I was the guy that China called in. I was the first guy from the West actually to come in a crisis management position there. So what's happened is that politicians will never admit a mistake ever. So it's always somebody else's fault. And I guess it's kind of like saying, like, from their perspective, if I was going to run for president and I said, vote for me because I saved your job, you're going to look at me and say, well, how do I know I would have lost it? It's better you lose your job than I say, vote for me, I'll get the guy that did it.
Proactively, try to fix things, yeah.
This is what they love, crisis. And then they always want to blame somebody else, always. It's never government. That's why I say there's no mirrors in the halls of government, because they never look at themselves.
And the current situation, Martin, I'm not talking just about COVID and the pandemic. I have a few questions later on about that. But the debt levels, the deficits, the printing going wild, fiscal policy, monetary policy. I know that you love history, especially you are an expert in monetary policy, monetary history. So what period in the past would you compare the one that we are living just now? Is there any precedent, or what is like the Roman decline or not? Is not that dire the situation that we are living on? So
not exactly the same, because Rome didn't have a national debt. But what there is there's usually some sort of spark that causes people to suddenly no longer trust government. In the case of Rome, they actually captured the Roman Emperor Valerian I, the Persians did, and they couldn't, Rome couldn't even go rescue him. So, I mean, can you imagine, like, if the president of the United States went to Russia and Putin said, that's it, I'm keeping him, and nobody could go get him? I mean, you suddenly say, oh my God, we're not as powerful as we thought, so
right.
it had a psychological impact. And within the next 8 years, Rome basically fell. Its monetary system collapsed. And, people don't even understand what hyperinflation is. They think, oh, it's just the government printing money or whatever. That's not true. In the case of Germany, for example, it was December 1922. The government was basically broke, so they did a forced loan. They came in and they said, we're taking 10% of everybody's assets. And they gave you a bond, which they eventually defaulted on. But once that happened in December 1922, the hyperinflation just went completely crazy in 1923. Because all of a sudden, it was like, we're in trouble. Our government can't be trusted. They just stole 10% of everything I had. So then people, they start... when there's gold coins or silver coins, they hoard that. So then the coinage gets debased. In the case of paper money or whatever, they start converting to the currency of other countries to get away from their own. So, I mean, history's always, it repeats because human nature never changes. The politicians always exceed their powers. It's inevitable. No, it doesn't matter what kind of government we're talking about, if it's a democracy, a republic, authoritarian or monarchy. They've all failed. If that was not true, we'd all still be speaking Babylonian.
And what do you think that it would be this time, the end game? About all these debt excesses and all these ratios? Do you think it's going to be wiped out through inflation, through default, or like stand and pretend forever? Or
no, they're basically going to really default. I mean, the central bank there in Europe has already pretty much destroyed its bond market. So the quantitative easing is them buying the bonds back and forth all the time. So if you can't even sell your debt because you're not paying a reasonable interest rate, the central bank can't continue to do this forever. So Klaus Schwab put out his little video, who's been pushing them, the World Economic Forum. And you can probably find it on YouTube. If not, we took a copy and put it on our site. But there are 8 solutions for Agenda 2030. And the first one, it says, you will own nothing and you'll be happy. What is that? I mean, that's communism. But it's the way it's being pitched is that we're not doing this for us, we're doing it for you. All right, so we're going to relieve you of all your debts. All right, so you won't owe any mortgages or credit card debt or student loans. And we're the good guys. But meanwhile, they also don't pay theirs. So
right.
it's just a sales pitch that they're really doing. But it's not, it's more of a return to feudalism, because they have no intention of confiscating the wealth of the super rich, the Bill Gates and George Soros and those people, which is why they support them. So it's more of a feudal type thing where the super rich get to keep their assets because somebody has to be in charge, and everybody else loses theirs. But you'll be happy because you won't have the burdens anymore. Um, I
Yeah.
mean, that's their agenda. I seriously doubt they're going to be able to pull it off because I think we'll be in revolutions by that time. Um, they don't understand this idea of Marxist. If you just go to a university and say, okay, fine, we're going to bring in that same concept. You got an A, so we're going to give you a C, and we're going to take those extra points and give them to somebody that flunked. And the student's going to go, well, wait a minute, I worked hard for that. Oh yeah, but we have to be fair and equal. Now, if this is, let's say, a school for surgery, do you want to have brain surgery from the guy that got the F and got the extra points, or do you want the guy that really did the A?
Right.
Excuse me, but they don't present it that way. They just present it in terms of money. Oh, he's earning more money than I am. That's not fair. We're not all the same. Yes, some jobs pay a lot more money. All right, there are fewer people that can do it. Um, so it all depends. I mean, it is a supply and demand sort of thing.
About the thing that you said just now about sparks and revolutions, don't you think that we had enough strong sparks or events, measures for people to rise and to kind of ask for their rights again back? Do you think that still there is more people pushing and putting forward their agendas, and people can still react? Or because some analyst says, I've read that they've given up because people they've already passed some thresholds of liberty-wise, this health kind of committee dictating everything, including like lockdowns and with its financial impacts. So you still have hope that at some point of time they will cross a red line and then people will react. That would be the spark. What would make
Yeah,
that spark
I think
to
the
light the fire?
U.S. election was critical for them. I mean, they had to remove Trump because he was the one standing in the way um, with this whole climate agenda and everything else and digital currencies. He took that out when the Democrats tried putting it in. So they had to get rid of him. Um, that was critical. And as soon as they just did, Bill Gates just put out, oh, we have to stop driving, we have to stop flying, and that's a bigger danger than COVID. So if you look at his remarks just now that Biden has been confirmed, you'll see that that's been the real agenda here. And they use COVID to scare everybody. I mean, look, it has a 99.5% survival rate. I mean, even the Hong Kong flu of 1969, 4 million people died. All right, we're at 1 million people with COVID worldwide. Um, so, I mean, they had Woodstock in the middle of 1969. So, I mean, there have been, you know, I would certainly say COVID is serious if you're looking at 5 to 10% of the population dying or something. But this is really not much anything different than the flu. I've known a number of people that have had it, and they all say the same thing, and it's been bad. They're over it, some of them in 2 or 3 days, others it's been, maybe a couple weeks. But they have trumped up this whole thing to scare people. And this is, was the best way to do this. And the real agenda was to stop everybody from driving around, planes, flying, whatever. And they thought they would be able to reduce CO2. And you can check. I mean, the latest study showed the CO2 didn't even go down. Um, So, I mean, and so you have Bill Gates coming out, we got to do more. I mean, these people are just simply wrong in their theories to begin with. All right. And, you know, it's just absurd, really. But unfortunately, you have this merger of Bill Gates, who's paranoid over population growth and CO2 levels. You got George Soros, who thinks that world peace can exist only if there's one government, and that should be the United Nations. And then you got, you know, Schwab from the World Economic Forum saying, "Oh, we all have to be equal," and a socialist agenda. So it's the merger of all these, the three of them primarily, which is driving everything. And so the question is, when will the people rise up? I think, you know, you're now looking at, you know, Bill Gates has just changed the agenda, saying we have to do more now for climate change. It's more dangerous than COVID. So they've been feeding this to us little by little, and the object was to prevent people from, you know, driving, so lose their jobs, shutting down hotels, travel. Um, I mean, tourism is like been destroyed in an awful lot of places, and this is what they want. And then you look at uh, Biden had on his lecture, he says, "Build back better." You see the same thing from the World Economic Forum. You see the same thing from Johnson in the UK. The same thing from, you know, Trudeau in
Yeah.
Canada. This is a marketing plan that was put together by, I believe it was Edelman, working with their partner. They, you know, do partnerships with the World Economic Forum. So this has been an agenda that has been sold to the world. And so when will the people wake up? I think when they realize that they've been fooled. I mean, you have people scared to death, walking around with masks and all this other kind of stuff, which is largely to keep people from assembling. And, oh, you can't get more than 10 people, whatever. Um, because if they get groups together, they're afraid there is going to be a revolution. Um, and you even have Schwab saying publicly, if they don't accept his ideas, there's going to be a revolution. It's the exact opposite, really. But
Mhm.
he's trying, again, shift the blame to violence to somebody else, not himself. Um, so I think when the people realize that this COVID lockdown stuff has really been for climate, and now they're going to say climate is even more dangerous than COVID. All right, and there is not going to be a build back better. Um, you got Johnson in the UK saying, "Oh, we're going to open up training so people can get, you know, jobs in you know, in the new green world." Not everybody can make such transitions. That was a big problem for the Great Depression. In the U.S., 40% of the people were still farmers. They had the Dust Bowl, etc., and they couldn't make the transition to learn how to work in a factory. And that's why unemployment went so high to like 25% back then. So
Right.
not everybody can make that transition. We're all not simply rats in a maze here that, you know, dangle the cheese at the end and we all follow it. Not everybody can do the same thing.
Right. Um, Going back to Socrates, in your website, armstrongeconomics.com, one thing that you have been constant in commenting on is about civil riots. So in your blog, you always have every week or every 2 weeks, reading your forecasting machine, you have a warning saying that in the cycle in 21 or 22, you foresee that. So what is going to be like? It's going to be scattered riots here and there, or it's going to be something dire, some the famous spark that we were talking before
It's
that
more
will
the famous spark. I mean, you are seeing a sharp rise in protests everywhere, in Berlin and France. Um, I mean, people are, you're getting more and more people joining them. And I mean, they try and shut them down, um, everything they can. But this is the civil unrest. Now, the difference is civil unrest is what can lead to revolution. The other side is international war. Now, that's also concerning to me because we have politicians like, pointing the finger, oh, this is like from China, etc. And you start pointing the finger at other countries, oh, see, it's their fault. That is what creates the international war. So, it's shifting the blame from you to the guy next door. And so the civil unrest is what leads to the revolution domestically. And the other side is what creates the international problem. And the other serious factor of this is that, I mean, I've, advised more governments around the world than I think anybody. I've really been um, very exposed to international uh, trends, etc. So what makes world peace is not nuclear weapons and all this nonsense. Um, and I've tried to explain it to people, but um, what raised both, you had Japan and Germany both rise from the ashes out of World War II. Why? Because they were efficient and they could sell products to other countries, particularly the United States. China rose to the second world economy in a short period of time because they had access to the United States market. Now, you're not going to create war. Why would China be interested in creating war against the United States when that is what has boosted their economy? So many of their jobs depend upon selling something to the U.S. consumer. What creates world peace is economics. It's not war. It's not arms. Okay? As long as everybody's, I call it, fat and happy, nobody's going to fight. As soon as you undermine that, now it's a problem. And that's what these people don't understand. These academics that are trying to destroy the economy to build it back better green. Well, in destroying the economy, you're now hurting people in China, Russia, etc. Now, if it's no longer to their advantage to deal with us because we're not dealing, I mean, consumers losing their jobs, nobody's allowed to drive around anymore. They've shut off flights. So then what happens? Then you get into the international war. Oh, it's their problem. They're the ones that have caused me to lose my house, my whatever, domestically. And that's where the international war comes in. And that's the problem with these academics. They just sit there, they'll meet in some five-star hotel, drink their wine, and all talk to each other and pat each other on the back. Oh, yes, that's the way the world should work. And they've never stepped out of that ivory tower to ever even talk to somebody. They have no concept of how the world really works. It's just astonishing. I was called into in 1987 when the stock market crashed. They called me into to what was the Brady Commission. I didn't want to go because I hate working with these people. And I ended up getting lobbied. People tell me you got to do it because they're blaming computers, etc. So, all right. So naturally, the person they put in charge was an academic. I think it was MIT he was from. And first words out of his mouth is that we're going to find the guy that shorted this market, and pushed it down. And I just said, excuse me. I said, do you realize that every investigation since 1907 has begun with those same words? And nobody's ever been found. And I said, do you even understand how the market functions? Oh, yes, well, I borrow stock from this guy and I sell it to that guy. I said, okay, fine. So how can some short position always outnumber the long positions? He's borrowing from one person who's still long and he's selling it to another, creating another long. I mean, so how can he outnumber them? And then he just looks at me and I said, well, what about futures? Every contract's got to be matched. And he's just looking at me. He says, well, I teach finance. I said, that's very nice. Okay, I have over $3 trillion under contract that I advise on. I said, I actually talk to the real people. And he said, well, what makes it go down? I said, very simple. I said, you've never traded. You know, when you look at this, and virtually everybody's long in the market. Something happens, something news, whatever, something scares them. They turn around, they try to sell, and there's no bid. All of a sudden, stocks start dropping dramatically, and because everybody's on one side, you know, and the only person who has the courage to buy in a panic is the short person. Then you got these politicians, oh, we have to outlaw the shorts. Well, then the market goes down even further because there is no short guy that's to say, okay, fine, I'm going to take my profit. Um, I mean, nobody's going to buy a falling knife. It's just not going to happen. And that's how a market will crash faster than it takes to go up. Why? Because human nature takes somebody a long time to trust before they buy. All right. But when they lose confidence, they lose it very fast. It's just human nature. And I was giving a lecture in Tokyo. It was just an institutional session, and this one guy bribed somebody in a hotel to get in. And he came up to me and he says, look, I apologize, you know, how I got in. He said, I just had to talk to you. And he had bought the very high of the Japanese stock market the last day of 1989. And not with a small amount, with $50 million. What made it even more interesting, it was the first time in his life he ever bought stock. And he was probably in his mid-60s. Now I'm very curious as to, you know, I said, well, what made you actually buy the very high? And he said, brokers had approached him every year for 7 years. And they said, look, the stock market goes up 5% generally every January. They finally convinced him. He watched it for 7 years. All right, fine, you're right. He bought on December 31st, the very high, and lost basically about 50% of what he put in within 3 months. So that's what happens. Everybody, you've got the last guy who ever would have bought has now just bought. Now there's no new buyers left to come in. So all of a sudden somebody turns, they want to try and sell, and there are no buyers there. It just falls rapidly, very, very fast. So I mean,
Interesting.
academics don't understand this. They've never traded. Um, that's why I find there aren't that many of us who were hedge fund managers through all this stuff. But you know, we were the only people that ever saw this and how it actually works on a global basis. Um, Granted, I mean, nobody wants to go back and teach. Um, I said I would write a book, you know, maybe or give a guest lecture on this, but we have different times. You can't keep teaching the same theories that are, you know, 50 years old.
Right. Very interesting, Martin. Thanks for that story. Uh, Changing the subject, central bank digital currencies. I think at the beginning of the call, we just touched the subject. My analysis on this one is the following. Let me know your opinion. The monetary policy being almost exhausted, we are at kind of negative interest rates. A lot of the debt of the world is already, especially in Europe, Switzerland, Germany, it's negative. Then QE and the monetary expansion to looking at the debt GDP ratios is kind of off limits as well. So maybe they can use the central bank digital currencies for articulating a special monetary policy through directly the central bank. So a kind of creating a digital wallet or something with the central bank, and the central bank would bypass the commercial banks and then give you that money. And normally that would be more effective because the banks, they won't lend because they have not liquidity, but solvency problems. So, okay, then we will get rid of them as we have digital wallets with you, the citizens, and then we will send you, I don't know, checks every, I don't know, to be decided when. And I don't know if that central bank digital currency will be a competing currency with the dollar, euros, Swiss francs, etc., or it would be one-to-one exchangeable. I read some papers, Bank of England, BCE, Bank of England says, advocates in a paper that should be a different, not one-to-one converted. BCE seems that they would like this conversion to be articulated. What's your take on this one?
Well, that is correct from that perspective. They don't need the intermediary banks anymore. Even the Fed has come out and said that they will end up taking deposits directly from corporations or whatever, which is highly unusual. But what's going on? Why are they even looking at this to begin with? And that is the reason they went to negative interest rates, and in their reasoning, they have failed, is because people could take their money out of the bank and hoard it underneath, buy a safe, just keep it cash at home, so you don't have to pay the negative interest rate. So to them, we are the problem again. We are hoarding our money. We're not spending it. All right, and the reasoning they come up with is that if we cancel all the physical paper money, then they can't hoard. They have to put the money back in the bank. That's the other side of what they're actually looking at, because it's been this whole argument over the zero boundary and all this sort of stuff, and so they've been looking at, they've been buying 1,000-franc notes out of Switzerland, things of this nature. Hoarding dollars, about 70% of U.S. dollars actually circulate outside the country. So people have been going to Swiss and U.S. dollars even as a hedge against the euro, in fear that maybe they just cancel the euro. So these are the times that we live in. So it's definitely this two-issue event that they will compete against the banks because they're no longer going to bail them out. So if they're no longer going to bail them out, that's critical because they're also no longer going to be worried about the debt. Then on the other hand, they want to prevent us from hoarding money. See, part of hyperinflation, people misunderstand. What Gresham had recognized when he was working there at the exchange in Amsterdam, and he said good money is driven out of circulation by bad. What was he talking about? All right, if they're debasing the currency, you're hoarding the old coinage. You're not spending it. And so we see the same thing in Rome, that the debasement took place, and people were finding hoards of even debased coins. So they were still hoarding debased coins as well. All right. So if you don't trust the system, you don't know who's going to survive. If you look at the high in the PE ratio, you can go to our site in the U.S. stock market. The high was like 200 to 1, and it was at the low in 2009. Why does that make any sense? Because at that stage in the game, if you're worried about the banks and you didn't trust the government, then what do? They were just buying blue chip stocks and hoping to break even. It wasn't how much am I going to make on this stock, do I get my money back? Where they didn't have that confidence in the bank. So you start this
Right.
process of parking money. Where do I just park it? So I know it's safe, I can at least get it back. So that's different than, gee, okay, fine, I'll buy the Dow because it's going to go up 5%. That's not the issue
Mm.
anymore. So those are when we're all fat and happy. Okay. When we're not fat and happy and we're worried about the future, then you're looking at where do I just park the money? I mean, a lot of people in Europe have just been taking cash and sticking in the safe at home, but and not spending their money. And you just look at the velocity of in the United States. It's been going down. It reached a historic low in 2020. So again, you come in with the COVID thing, you're shutting people down, they're losing their jobs. Are they really going to spend money? No, they're going to hoard money and wait to see I don't know what the future is going to bring.
Clear.
So why would they go out and oh, okay, fine, I'll give you a stimulus check. Here's $600. You're going to go out and party? No, they stick it in the drawer. Okay, they don't go out and say, okay, fine, let me get drunk tonight and have a good time. Um, you know, the average person isn't that stupid. We're not
Right.
all teenagers. Um,
Right. Moving to Europe, Martin. Two more questions. I don't want to take more of your precious time. So, in Europe, how do you see the situation? You see the debt levels in Europe, the European community, economic community risks about breaking up. Um, the you see a potential end game as being the European debt homogenized and not each country issuing their own debt. So, what's your idea on the future on Europe, taking into account this pandemic situation that we have? How Europe will emerge out of this pandemic?
um, well, they've only increased the risk of breaking up the EU. Um, Now, when they sold the Corona bonds per se, it was fantastic, it was oversubscribed, but the rate was higher than Germany. So, in other words, what is that saying? It's saying the market still had more faith in Germany than it did in the EU. Um, and uh, when they were forming the EU, they came to me, and they took the whole back row in our conference in London, um, and I sat down with them and I said, look, I mean, what you're saying is just not going to work. That I told them back then, you have to consolidate the debts, and they said they can't. It was political, and it was mainly Germany saying no, 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 we're not. That's a bailout for Greece or whatever. Um, but then they were promising, oh, everybody's going to pay the same interest rate, which was nonsense. And to me, I mean, they knew they were lying to everybody because, I mean, they were trying to say, oh, see, the United States has one interest rate because they have the dollar. That's for the federal government. Okay. Then each state, yes, they still have the dollar, but each state pays different interest rates based upon their credit risk. And everybody in the country, some people have, great credit, others don't. I mean, the currency doesn't change that. Um, but that was the sales pitch that they presented to try and create the EU. And the whole thing has been this idea that, um, creating one government will end war in Europe. And that still doesn't work. Um, I explained to them, I said, okay, what made the United States great? It's very simple. Everybody came, and it was kind of fair. Whoever was the last one off the boat was discriminated against until they spoke English and they could get jobs. I said, so you ask an American, gee, what are you? And he says, oh, well, I'm half German, I'm half Spanish, or I'm half French, and whatever. You don't see that in Europe so much. Um, once everybody spoke a common language, then everybody intermarried. So it was really the languages that do keep Europe apart. Um, I mean, I've been down in Athens, and they were protesting against the Germans. They're dressed up as Nazis. So the resentment still lingers from a long time. And I mean, I was over in Yugoslavia before they broke up. They're going, oh, they killed 600 of us, and they put us in a common grave. And I thought, gee, did I miss something? I didn't see that in the news. I said, when did that happen? Oh, about 700 years ago. Oh, that one. Yes. Okay. You know, uh, so you have that, which is cultural,
Yeah.
right? And everybody has different customs, and it's different languages. And I've been in Europe, probably a third of my life, and I always think, okay, fine. Italy was different than Spain, and Spain was different than France. That was nice. That's what made Europe so vibrant. Um, and so this time, where you had the American Revolution first, and then that was a contagion that led to the French Revolution. Um, this time, it may be the other way around, because France, in particular, already had the Yellow Vest movement. So they were already organized. Um, and now you throw the COVID stuff on top of it. And so they already had a system of protest to begin with. So you may find more of the civil unrest in Europe, which then filters over to the United States. Um, but this is what we're facing. And like I said, if you just look at Bill Gates's comments, uh, now that Trump is defeated, immediately comes out, oh, the climate is now more dangerous than COVID. So and what's he saying there? We have to stop driving and stop flying around. All right. Um, I mean, we had our conference here in Orlando, and we have staff from London, Germany, Abu Dhabi, China. We have staff in India, uh, Singapore, Thailand, and every staff comes in for our annual conferences from all over the world. None of them could come this year. Um, they had to appear on like Skype. Hello, nice to see everybody. Sorry I can't be there. I mean, this is serious. I mean, I don't know if I'm going to see Europe again. Um, and a lot of the hotels that people used to stay at are closed. They're gone. You
Yeah.
can't shut down travel like this.
Yeah.
But this
Not
is
temporary. It's
it's
definitely like permanently closed. Yeah.
yes, this is intentional. I mean, the first round with politicians, okay, fine, maybe they could have been stupid, made a mistake. Then again and again, no, this is intentional. They
I
know
agree.
what they're doing. Um, and it's not to keep you safe. Um, that's nonsense. I mean, herd immunity is like with the flu or whatever. I mean, if this was really a serious threat, I would understand, but it's not. It's not much different than the flu as far as the death rate is concerned. And it's certainly, 20% of what it was, just in 1969. I
Yeah.
mean, even the flu of 2009 was worse.
Yeah.
So they're never going to tell you the truth. Just understand that. And I think that's where the civil unrest comes about. Because the people eventually realize when they start moving now, oh, we got to do this for climate change. Um, then I think you're going to have a lot more people starting to connect the dots and say, wait a minute, what's going on?
Mhm. Connect the dots in this situation that we are not allowed to see each other physically. All the interactions today are through a screen, and then in the screens basically is like social media. like Facebook, Twitter, and all the tools, that there is a certain control on them. So it's tougher to kind of discuss with certain criticism of the official narrative, because now we are not allowed to see each other or to walk together, or here in Europe we are in a strong lockdowns, so that makes it harder to convey those kind of information or different or challenging the official narrative.
And what they're doing is that the upper class might be able to work remotely from home. The lower classes that count on their physical labor can't. So you're making the poorest even poorer.
Right.
And that's not a good, recipe for the future. And they think they can overcome that. Oh, okay, fine. Here's guaranteed, basic income. Just stay home and watch TV. I mean, eventually you can't. People just get bored. They can't stand there and just watch TV for the rest of their life because you got a check coming in to stay home. But this is also why they need to default on the debts, create the digital currency. They need to do a lot of this, and if you don't comply, then your guaranteed basic income is cut off. And I have a friend that, in Estonia, and she lived there basically under Stalin, and she said we had more freedom under Stalin than we do today, which is actually true.
Okay, last question, Martin, about gold. How do you see the price of gold evolving, and what are the challenges today of owning gold? So what is the link between gold and digital currencies? It would be easy in the future to get rid of the gold when prices tells you that you need to sell, or they won't make it easy?
The problem with gold is they are very much aware of it. So you can't travel with it anymore. In Italy, if you look like you had too much in gold chains, they pull you off and start weighing it. In the United States, you can use. There was somebody with just $30,000 worth of gold, and she came across the border from Canada. They confiscated it. So they're very much aware of gold. So I am, I think gold will survive the long term. All right, but is it something that you're going to be able to travel with or something? No. You better not put it in a storage facility that they know about, because they can always confiscate it, and you have to worry about when they say you will own nothing and be happy. It's in the 30s when they confiscated gold in the United States, they didn't go door to door, but whatever gold was on deposit in a bank, they took. So I'm saying at the very least, we have to realize that if you got gold in a storage facility that is known to be a gold storage facility, I'd probably take it out, because they know where to go get it. Will they come knocking on everybody's door? I don't think so. But would you be able to travel even from Spain to France? Probably not. So we have to understand that we're really living in a very, very authoritarian period, and these people see us as the enemy. They're not there to help us, take care of us. They're not Santa Claus.
What about the price this year that is starting in 2022? How do you see it evolving?
I think eventually you're starting to look out. Probably by 2024, we should go up to at least the 3,000 to 5,000 area, in terms of dollars. But you also got to realize that also means the purchasing power of the currency also declines. So it's not just that gold goes up by itself. So, I mean, that's pretty much what we're looking at. I mean, if you look at the German hyperinflation and things of that nature, any tangible assets tended to, make the breach to the other side. Art, paintings, rare coins, things of that nature. And so, you might want to look at things of, a little diversity to some degree. But we live definitely in stressful times. There's no question about that. And the governments are always prone to try to survive themselves. They come first, we come second. They're not there to take care of us. They're there to control and rule us. And that's basically what every government evolves to. It's unfortunate, but, when Caesar crossed the Rubicon, most of the history books took what Cicero wrote. They were the oligarchs. You didn't vote for the Senate. The Senate was the aristocrats. And when Caesar crossed the Rubicon, they said, oh, he's a dictator. Well, Cicero was also a dictator for a year. They like to leave that out. But the senators fled. Now, why would they flee if Caesar was this dictator? That meant that the people weren't supporting them and the rest of the army fled? Because Caesar didn't come across with a huge force, a very small force, and they all fled. All right. But why do we have the Julian calendar that started? Because back then, the high priest inserted the days for like leap year. If you didn't want to go to an election, you went and you gave him some money and say, here, give me put an extra 2 months in there. So when Caesar crossed the Rubicon, it was winter rather, but according to calendar, it should have been winter rather than summer. All right. So Caesar went in and took over the post of high priest and changed the calendar, put in leap year. Okay. No more discretion. No more putting in extra days. He went through and started cleaning up everything. If you look at all the actions that he really did, he was not some ruthless dictator. These were the oligarchs, like the super rich, all right, and they're the ones that ended up stabbing him and trying to take back the country.
Mm-hmm.
And they lost. I mean, but this is the way all republics fall. Any republic ends up always as an oligarchy. And throughout history, there isn't a single one that's ever survived. I think the only optimum type of government that would ever possibly work, and that might only be for another 200 or 300 years, would be closer to a democracy, where you have people that actually are elected to a post that oversees the bureaucracy, and they're there only for 1 year and must leave. Once somebody becomes a career politician, he's no longer one of the people. He's always going to be in the opposite side. And that's what they didn't like about Trump. He was never a politician. He wasn't one of them. They didn't like that about Reagan when he came in. Oh, he's a governor. He's not one of us. Um, so they only like people who worked in Washington. If they had to be a congressman or a senator, no problem. If he's Republican, Democrat, didn't matter. As long as he's one of them.
Great discussion, Martin. Thank you very much for your insights. Anything that you would like to wrap up with? Any advice or any kind of summary before we go?
I would say, just, pay attention. They're now going to shift it towards climate change is a greater threat than COVID. To keep the same systems, keep everybody socially distanced, stop travel, tourism coming to an end. It's the same agenda. They're just going to change the excuse now. We have to do this for climate change.
All right. Thank you very much for your time, Martin.
Well, Thank
It
you
was a
for inviting
pleasure.